Part 40. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 391. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something. He turned his head and glanced at Susan. "Does any of you know where that place was?" Duke William walked over slowly, and he just smiled. "I know the place just now. If I guessed correctly, it should be the Fallen Plain. According to legend at that time, the gods once fought there, so there was no grass in the area for thousands of miles, and there was a mountain on the other side. It is the most fertile land of our great empire where the sun never sets. Her Majesty the Queen did send people to investigate before, but there was no clue." After everyone heard what Duke William said, a special color flashed in their eyes. Especially at this time, Lin Yu nodded slightly and turned towards Duke William. While taking a look, the corners of his mouth also evoked a few meaningful smiles. "Very good, thanks to Mr. Duke this time, otherwise, I'm afraid it would have taken some effort to find this place." Duke William just smiled, and then glanced around. "I have prepared a plane for everyone. 2 private planes are enough to accommodate all of us. If you don't mind, you can fly with me." Except for the woman, almost everyone left by plane. After the woman heard Duke William's proposal, she just waved her hand. "We have our own way to get there, Mr. Lin. Out of trust, I will keep this map with you for the time being, but I hope you will not betray our trust." The woman's beautiful eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu just smiled, and then nodded slightly. "Of course, no problem, my beautiful lady." After hearing what Lin Yu said, Eliza just waved her hand casually, and then turned around and left. That graceful back really touched the hearts of all the men present. Susan's eyes were staring straight at Eliza's back, with a bit of coldness flashing in her eyes. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled. This time when he cooperated with the Z organization, he felt like he was dancing on the tip of a knife. Lin Yu felt not only a bit of excitement, but also a kind of danger, that exciting feeling. The feeling touched Lin Yu's heart, which had been calm for a long time. Susan turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu. "I always feel that there is something wrong with that woman. Once you enter this ancient battlefield of gods, you'd better be careful." Lin Yu just nodded lightly and didn't say anything more after that. The plane flew very fast. Although it needed to cross the entire country, it only took 1 day. In the afternoon of the next day, they arrived near the mountain range. But it was getting late, so they chose to rest here for the night. The local city lord heard that Duke William was coming and came to his place. He was naturally full of excitement at this moment. Although the city lord didn't know what the group of people were doing here, he still warmly entertained them. That night, Duke William found Lin Yu and explained to Lin Yu that after entering the ruins, he was preparing to explore on his own. Lin Yu heard Duke William say this and was naturally filled with joy. After all, for him said, this Duke William is no different than a burden. Little William and William had the same plan, because they knew very well that no matter what kind of good things they found in Lin Yu's place, as long as Lin Yu took a fancy to it, they would have absolutely no chance of getting involved. At this time, Lin Yu could of course see their little thoughts, but to Lin Yu, this was understandable. Early the next morning, a few of them crossed the stretching mountains. Although they encountered several very powerful strange beasts on the way, to Lin Yu, these strange beasts were nothing at all. Lin Yu, it was very easy to defeat those strange beasts. When it was approaching evening the next day, the parchment scroll in Lin Yu's arms began to tremble violently. Lin Yu took out this parchment scroll, and then on the desert, they saw a building similar to an ancient Roman temple in the distance. You must know that before this, there was a vast desert. Up, as far as the eye can see, nothing can be seen at all. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with excitement. At this time, everyone was breathing heavily, and their hearts were beating wildly. You must know that the artifacts of the fallen gods and their mounts on the battlefield of the ancient gods are all left behind in the battlefield of the ancient gods. The battlefield of the ancient gods represents wealth. As long as they take it out, and it may even affect the structure of today's world. This makes them unhappy. At this time, the parchment, after pointing out the temple, actually fell down in an instant. Lin Yu grabbed the parchment in his hand. When everyone looked at the parchment, there was a look in their eyes. They all have a bit of greed. This time, her name was Lin Yu. What she never expected was that Elizabeth only brought 3 people with her. These 3 people were wearing black robes and masks on their faces, looking quite mysterious. The 3 people would occasionally look at Lin Yu, and their faces seemed to be quite solemn, and they seemed to be quite wary of Lin Yu. However, these were nothing to Lin Yu. Eliza walked to Lin Yu's side. The sheepskin roll is on you, so let's go together. When the time comes, we will see what treasures we can get. What do you think? Eliza seemed to be very confident in her 3 companions, so she dared to put forward such conditions to Lin Yu so unscrupulously. After hearing Eliza's words, Lin Yu nodded and smiled. Okay, there is no problem with this. The group marched towards them in a mighty manner. At this time, the live broadcast room that had been closed for a long time was actually opened. No one knew who was controlling this live broadcast room. Lin Yu also knew about the live broadcast room, but he could not control it. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 392. However, Lin Yu knew that this live broadcast room did not have a big impact on him, and even if he encountered something that Lin Yu did not want to broadcast live, he had his own way to shut down this live broadcast room. So when Lin Yu thought of this, he just let the live broadcast go. Although the temple seemed not far from them, they had walked for a long time but still had not reached the temple. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of solemnity, and his brows seemed to be twisted together. Strange, it's really strange. This temple is obviously not too far from here, but why have we walked for such a long time, but still haven't reached it? Lin Yu said helplessly. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Eliza turned her head and looked at Lin Yu, and a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. It's actually very simple. After hearing what Eliza said, Lin Yu's face condensed slightly, and a bit of confusion flashed in his eyes. What do you mean? Because this temple is just a projection, and you didn't find that the spiritual power here is extremely thin. We can't waste any spiritual power. This is probably the first test of the ancient gods for us. After Lin Yu heard Eliza say this, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless. At this moment, he was thinking in his heart. What kind of ghost god is this? He is full and has nothing to do, so he has to do this. But although Lin Yu thought so in his heart at this time, he didn't say it directly. And at this time, several of them suddenly felt this, a surge of power around them, as if it was rushing towards them. Lin Yu felt this surge of power. There was also a flash of excitement in his eyes, and at this time his whole face began to become a little crazy. And just after this moment, Lin Yu ran straight to the front so suddenly. After seeing Lin Yu like this, all the people's eyes were full of confusion. At this time, their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. Mr. Lin, what happened to you? Found it, we finally found the place. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, all the people's eyes were full of confusion. They looked at each other, you looked at me, I looked at you, and they didn't dare to believe that what Lin Yu said was true. Mr. Lin, please forgive my stupidity, it seems that there is nothing special around here. After hearing what the man said, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of playfulness, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this moment, he lightly tapped forward a few times, and several spiritual powers burst out from his fingertips in an instant. Those spiritual powers broke through the sky, floated less than 3 feet in front, and then disappeared without a trace. After everyone saw this scene, the excitement in their eyes was beyond words. They looked at each other, their eyes full of excitement. Great, great, Mr. Lin is really wise, Mr. Lin is really wise. Everyone was praising Lin Yu, and at this time Lin Yu just smiled and didn't say much. At this time, Eliza walked to Lin Yu's side, and then turned her head and looked at Lin Yu, and a few meaningful smiles appeared on the corners of her mouth. I didn't expect Mr. Lin to be so powerful, I really admire him. After hearing what Eliza said, Lin Yu turned his head and looked at Eliza, and then nodded slightly. It's just the flattery of others, it doesn't count, it doesn't count. At this time, everyone suddenly discovered a problem. The problem is probably that even if they found the problem, they still couldn't get into it. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and there was a flash of confusion in their eyes, and then they raised their eyebrows slightly. Mr. Lin, how can we get in now? After hearing Duke William's words, Lin Yu looked around, and there was a flash of solemnity in his eyes, and finally his brows were slightly frowned. For now, I can only feel the existence of this barrier. I feel that there should be a broken space-time behind the barrier, so it can devour my spiritual power. For now, I don't know how to open it. Lin Yu said helplessly. Everyone was full of hope at the beginning, but later, when they heard Lin Yu say this, there was a flash of helplessness on their faces, and a bitter smile appeared at the corners of their mouths. Then now, isn't there any way to get in? Their eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and now Lin Yu has obviously become their backbone. At this time, after hearing what they said, Lin Yu half closed his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he raised his eyebrows slightly. It seems that it is true, but it is not completely impossible to solve this problem now. Lin Yu said slowly, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. After hearing what Lin Yu said, everyone's eyes flashed with excitement. I don't know if you have any solution, and I hope you can solve the problem. I'll try it first, but I can't be sure whether it will work or not. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he took a step forward. At this time, he directly summoned the space-time beast. When the space-time beast appeared in front of everyone, everyone was stunned. The eyes of those people were staring at the space-time beast, and their eyes and eyebrows were full of disbelief. This can't be the legendary space-time beast owned by Mr. Lin, it's amazing, it's really amazing. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 393. Everyone's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast, and their eyes were filled with excitement. At this time, the space-time beast turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu. Tell me, summon me. What do you want me to do? The space-time beast spoke unhurriedly like this, as if he had long been accustomed to his daily routine as a wage earner. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, a bit of excitement flashed in his eyes, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. Lin Yu's gaze made the space-time beast faintly numb, and he subconsciously took a few steps back. You need to calm down, I'm telling you, I'm not a prostitute. 3 black lines appeared on Lin Yu's forehead, and he was speechless for a while. He rolled his eyes at the space-time beast angrily. Stop messing around, hurry up and see if you can solve this matter. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the time and space beast. When the time and space beast saw that Lin Yu was so serious, he stopped joking at this time. At this time, the space-time beast glanced forward, with a bit of solemnity flashing in his eyes. Whether I can resolve this barrier or not, I don't want you to go there. Of course, if you want to seek death, then of course I have nothing to say. After Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, his expression suddenly froze, and his eyes became even more solemn. He turned his head and glanced at the space-time beast. Did you discover something? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the space-time beast. At this time, the space-time beast also nodded slightly. I did find something interesting, do you want to know? The space-time beast's eyes were fixed directly on Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu nodded slightly after hesitating for a moment. That's natural. Tell me what interesting things you found. At this time, the space-time beast waved his hand like this, and then a whirlpool suddenly appeared in front of him. The spiritual power around it, which was already very thin, moved crazily towards this whirlpool. It just came together. There was a hint of a meaningful smile on the corner of the space-time beast's mouth. I think there is no need for me to say anything more now. You should all understand it. The space-time beast said this unhurriedly. After everyone heard what the time and space beast said, they instantly understood what the time and space beast meant. This is probably not just a chaotic space. The space inside seems to be able to absorb people's spiritual energy. This is probably also the reason why there is no grass growing within 1,000 miles around. When Lin Yu thought of this, his brows seemed to be knitted together, and then he narrowed his eyes. We're already here now, we can't stop moving forward just because of this. Lin Yu sighed leisurely as he spoke, his eyes full of helplessness, and the bitter smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the time and space beast also turned around and glanced at Lin Yu. What you want to do is your business, but I advise you to think twice before you act. After all, it's a little while if you are not careful, you will be in big trouble. The space-time beast's eyes were staring directly at Lin Yu, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, Lin Yu was also slightly stunned, and he half squinted his eyes. Okay, I understand what you said, but to gain wealth in danger, you always have to fight hard, right? Lin Yu clenched his fists and clenched his teeth, his eyes full of determination. After everyone heard what Lin Yu said, they seemed to be inspired. Their eyes were also full of determination. Seeing these people like this, the space-time beast was speechless for a while. However, at this time, he no longer tried to dissuade Lin Yu. He just smiled. In that case, well, I wish you good luck. In fact, this barrier is just the most common kind of barrier. As long as you find the right spot and hit it hard, you can break it easily. The space-time beast said so unhurriedly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the space-time beast said, he nodded gently. Then do you know where that point is now? Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at the space-time beast. At this time, the space-time beast was also speechless for a while. But now that things have reached this point, he also knows Lin Yu's character and persuades Lin Yu to give up midway. It was probably unlikely, so I started to make assumptions. About a quarter of an hour later, the space-time beast suddenly opened his eyes, and he said two numbers 233, 221. No one understood what the space-time beast meant by this, and only Lin Yu had a meaningful smile on his lips. Very good, I really have you. The space-time beast turned its head and glanced at Lin Yu, then nodded and smiled. As long as I can help you, it doesn't matter much else. The two people just looked at each other and smiled. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have remembered something and turned his head to look at the space-time beast. You said that after entering here, the connection between the two of us will be blocked, right? What Lin Yu was most worried about was that he could not contact his alien beast. At this moment, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the time and space beast only hesitated for a moment and then shook his head. Lin Yu's face was full of joy. I knew it would definitely not be blocked. After hearing what Lin Yu said, The space-time beast just glanced at Lin Yu. I mean, I don't know if the contact between the two of us will be broken. At this moment, Lin Yu's heart was filled with 10,000 horses of grass and mud horses galloping past. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 394. My luck has always been very good, and this time I will turn the corner like before. I believe in myself. Lin Yu just spoke unhurriedly. The space-time beast heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, he just smiled. I hope this time it will be like what you said. Now I can only wish you good luck. At this time, Lin Yu smiled, but didn't say anything more. After waiting for a while, a roiling force quietly gathered. At this time, Lin Yu glanced towards the center of the desert. The yellow sand in the sky was like the scythe of death, flying towards them at a very fast speed. When Lin Yu saw this scene, his expression was shocked, and his eyes were full of solemnity. Oops, you must not be swept away by these yellow sands. If you are swept away by these yellow sands, then I'm afraid you will be dead. Lin Yu said helplessly. A sense of panic spread to everyone's hearts. And deep in this battlefield of gods, in a wasteland, there was a dilapidated tombstone, and then a hand suddenly stretched out from the soil, and the man slowly got up, with the look in his eyes at this moment. It's all a sense of desolation. It's great, after so many years, I can finally see the light of day again, ha 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 ha. The man burst out laughing as he spoke, with a look of madness between his brows. There were a few crows surrounding him. After hearing the man's laughter, these crows immediately he just ran away, not daring to stay here any longer. At this time, the man seemed to feel the breath of the outside world, and he breathed the air greedily. And at this moment, a goddess wearing a white gauze walked over slowly. The woman's steps were light and her figure was graceful. Although she was covered with a scarf, she just relied on her expressive eyes. You can see how beautiful this woman is. Ares, I didn't expect you to wake up too. I believe you should have felt that person's breath too. The woman just said this unhurriedly. After hearing the woman's voice, Ares' expression condensed slightly, and then he turned his head and glanced at Oceanus. I didn't expect you to wake up too. It seems that all the gods who were sleeping back then should be awake now. Ares said this unhurriedly. After Oceanus heard what Ares said, a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then his eyes were fixed on Ares. What do you think? Are they awake or not? Oceanus' tone was very gentle. After Ares heard what Oceanus said, a special color flashed across his face, and then he raised his eyebrows slightly. What do you mean? Resuscitating you, the god of war, has taken a lot of my divine power, so how should you repay me? Oceanus spoke unhurriedly, her voice was very sweet, giving people a dreamy feeling like the ocean. After hearing what Oceanus said, Ares realized that this matter was not as simple as he imagined. At this time, Ares's brows seemed to be knitted together, a few meaningful smiles appeared at the corners of his mouth, and a trace of amusement flashed in his eyes. It seems that I am very lucky this time. I can ask the goddess of the sea to revive me first. At this time, Oceanus didn't say anything nonsense to Ares. He just turned his head and glanced in Ares' direction. Can you still feel the war beast at that time? After hearing what Oceanus said, Ares did not reply at that time. Instead, he narrowed his eyes. After a moment, he suddenly opened his eyes, with a look in his eyes. There was a flash of solemnity, and the headless body seemed to be screwed together. It feels very strange. I actually have no way to get in touch with my beast. What is going on? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of Oceanus's mouth, and his face was completely filled with a sense of helplessness. Originally, I thought I was the only one who was like this, but now it seems that it's not just me who is like this, it turns out you are too. After hearing what Oceanus said, Ares immediately began to realize how unusual this matter was, and he half closed his eyes. It looks like things are in some trouble, right? A wry smile appeared on the corner of Oceanus's lips, and then he nodded. And at this moment, the expressions of the two people seemed to be frozen for an instant. They suddenly turned their heads, and then they glanced into the distance, with a kind of expression on their faces. Uneasiness. The battlefield of the gods has been opened. At this time, Lin Yu and the others worked together to attack the point calculated by the space-time beast. The powerful spiritual power instantly attacked the weakest point of this barrier, and then an incomparable and powerful force broke out in this barrier. The power was amazing. After feeling this force, Lin Yu couldn't help but feel a little palpitation. When this powerful force collided with this point, the barrier was like broken glass, breaking bit by bit. When the barrier was broken, they instantly felt a strong suction force, and then they were sucked into it by this strong attraction, right where they were standing. A magnificent and tall temple slowly appeared in front of everyone, but they should not be able to see it for the time being. Susan quickly flew over and grabbed Lin Yu. His whole body was like an octopus, hugging Lin Yu tightly. Lin Yu was also helpless at this moment. At this moment, Lin Yu had only one thought in his mind: this little girl is usually invisible and low-key, but I didn't expect her figure to be so good. This really caught me off guard. It's interesting, very interesting. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 395. I don't know how long everyone floated, and then they fell heavily to the ground. At this time, Lin Yu heard Susan's tender cry. Ouch! I'm about to fall to death. Lin Yu heard this, and after Susan finished saying this, she turned her head and glanced in his direction, and a few meaningful smiles appeared at the corners of her mouth. I didn't expect you to be quite. Lin Yu seemed to feel something was wrong midway through his words, so he stopped right there. After Susan saw Lin Yu like this, a bit of curiosity flashed in her eyes, and her big, watery eyes stared straight at Lin Yu. What else happened to me? At this time, Lin Yu waved his hands and smiled. No, it's nothing. But at this time, Susan obviously didn't believe what Lin Yu said, as her beautiful eyes looked back and forth at Lin Yu's body. Be honest, you must have something to say just now. Tell me honestly, be lenient if you confess, and be stern if you resist. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Susan said, he also laughed like this. His eyes were fixed on Susan's body, and a bit of teasing flashed in his eyes. Meaning, if you confess, you will be given leniency. If you go to jail, you will be punished. If you resist, you will be given strict punishment. Go home for the new year. After Susan heard what Lin Yu said, she couldn't help but stamp her feet, and then trotted up to Lin Yu. Will you tell me or not? At this time, Lin Yu was about to tease Susan, but at this moment, he heard a cough from the distance. Ahem. After Lin Yu and Susan heard the cough, their eyes flashed a bit solemnly, and then they slowly turned their heads. At this time, Lin Yu and Susan saw someone standing aside. Eliza. Lin Yu's expression was also slightly startled. Why is it you? After Eliza saw Lin Yu like this, a meaningful smile appeared on her lips, and her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. What's wrong? Did I show up at the wrong time and disturb the two of you? If that's the case, then I have to say sorry to you. Eliza had a smile on her face. After Susan saw this scene, her pretty face turned red, and then she turned her head away. At this time, Lin Yu also coughed lightly, rubbed his nose, and then looked around. There's something wrong here, it's better to be careful. Lin Yu obviously wanted to change the topic. Although his skills were not very good, Eliza seemed not to want to get too entangled with Lin Yu on this matter, so she cooperated with Lin Yu. Yes, it does look a little unpeaceful here. There are big problems, so be careful. The two people just looked at each other and smiled. At this time, a snake slowly crawled towards the two of them. This snake looked very strange, and at this time Lin Yu saw an introduction about this snake. Alien Beast, Skybreaking Snake Epic Level 6, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Intermediate. Life, 9999999999777. Speed, 9999999999777. Defense, 9999999999777. Attack, 9999999999777. Skill, unknown. Living in the desert all year round, it has extremely tough skin, is invulnerable, and has extremely tenacious survivability. It can still survive even after its body is cut off, and its strength is unmatched. Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, and his eyes were fixed directly on the skybreaking snake. His eyes were narrowed to a slit, and the same complex colors were evoked in his eyes. It's strange, skybreaking snake. This is the first time I've seen this. It's interesting, very interesting. The smile in Lin Yu's eyes began to become more and more obvious. And at this moment, an extremely mysterious aura spread out from the body of the skybreaking snake. Immediately afterwards, a ray of spiritual power cut through the sky and came directly towards their door. At this time, Lin Yu just wanted to mobilize his spiritual power, but found that all the spiritual power in his body was absorbed by this world. Clean. Everyone in the live broadcast room saw Lin Yu being attacked, but had no intention of fighting back. For a moment, their hearts could not help but rise. Hurry up and fight back. Why don't you fight back? If you don't fight back now, I'm afraid it will be too late even if you want to fight back. At this time, Bao Si and Zhuang Yudi also saw the scene through the TV. Zhuang Yudi's brows condensed slightly, and there was quite a bit of confusion in her eyes. With Lin Yu's strength, Xiang shouldn't be dealt with like this now. What is the reason for this? Why doesn't he fight back? Weird, simply too weird. Bao Si just glanced at the TV, and a meaningful smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. She turned her head and glanced at Zhuang Yudi. It's very simple. The reason why he doesn't fight back is not because he doesn't want to, but because the spiritual power in his body is insufficient, which is simply not enough for him to fight back. Bao Si just said it unhurriedly. Zhuang Yudi heard Bao Si. After saying this, she turned around and stared straight at Bao Si. Her brows seemed to be knitted together, and her eyes were filled with a kind of difficulty. Confidence. How is it possible? He can't fight back now? This doesn't make sense. Both of us have seen Lin Yu's strength before. At this time, Bao Si's face had a rare look of solemnity. She slowly raised her head and looked at the TV screen. She just glanced at it lightly, with a hint of solemnity flashing in her eyes. Because in this battlefield of the gods, the spiritual power in their bodies has been collected as tolls. Now there is not much spiritual power left in their bodies. I am afraid it will be difficult to even summon this strange beast, so how do you expect him to fight back? After Zhuang Yudi heard what Bao Si said, her eyes were fixed on Bao Si, and there was a look of disbelief in the corners of her eyes and eyebrows. Zhuang Yudi couldn't help but shook her head slightly. Could it be that this battlefield of gods is a robber? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 396. At this time, after Bao Si heard Zhuang Yudi say this, she suddenly smiled, and then nodded slightly. What you said is true. This battlefield of the ancient gods is probably an out-and-out stumbling block, an out-and-out bandit. They insist on entering. In fact, if you think about it in detail, you can't complain. Other people. Then this kid won't just hang here like this. After Bao Si heard what Zhuang Yudi said, she suddenly smiled. A bit of joking flashed in her eyes. If this is the case, he is basically in this desperate situation now, how should he respond? After Zhuang Yudi finished speaking, she turned around and stared directly at Bao Si. At this time, Bao Si heard what Zhuang Yudi said, and a smile appeared on her face that Zhuang Yudi couldn't figure out. Why don't you just watch it yourself? At this time, Zhuang Yudi was stunned, and she was speechless for a while. At this moment, although Lin Yu couldn't mobilize even half of his spiritual power, his reaction was still quick. At this moment, Lin Yu turned slightly sideways and avoided the oncoming sky-breaking snake. A blow. After Zhuang Yudi saw this scene, her face was also shocked. Her eyes were fixed on Bao Si, with a look of disbelief in her eyes. Could he be thinking about using his own strength to fight against the sky-breaking snake? He's crazy. He must be crazy. If he does this, he will die. At this time, after Bao Si heard what Zhuang Yudi said, she turned around and glanced at Zhuang Yudi coldly. If this was when the two armies were marching and fighting, I'm afraid he has been dragged out and beheaded. Zhuang Yudi just felt that Bao Si was a little strange today. She turned her head and glanced at Bao Si, and finally smiled suddenly. Maybe, but for now, this is not a march to fight, and I won't do anything that disturbs the morale of the army. The two women faced each other tit for tat, refusing to give in an inch. At this time, Bao Si just rubbed his head, with a wry smile on his lips. Maybe, I'm a little tired and want to go back and take a rest first. After Bao Si finished speaking, he turned around and left. Zhuang Yudi's eyes were fixed on Bao Si, and then she couldn't help but shook her head and smiled. Poor guy. But at this time, Zhuang Yudi also realized that something was wrong with Bao Si these days, but she couldn't explain what was wrong. Lin Yu's mind moved, and then a long sword suddenly appeared in his palm. When Lin Yu saw the long sword in his palm, he also breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, I was able to summon you, otherwise I might have been in trouble this time. The sword seemed to understand what Lin Yu said, and it actually let out a slight sword cry. It seemed that it was also very excited. The sky-breaking snake looked at the weak human being in front of him who had no spiritual power. His offensive was a bit sharper than before, because for him, Lin Yu, Elizabeth and Susan were the most powerful. Personally, it is a rare delicacy in the world. The sky-breaking snake's attack was a bit unscrupulous, but Lin Yu just dodged left and right and moved around repeatedly. The sky-breaking snake actually couldn't touch Lin Yu's body at all. After the two sides faced off like this for a while, the sky-breaking snake was all around. He was also a little angry, so he made a hissing sound in his mouth, which seemed to be warning Lin Yu. But at this time, there was only a mocking smile on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. Soon, you won't be arrogant anymore. Although Lin Yu has been dodging, he has been accumulating strength. Although the spiritual power here is a bit thin, he currently does not have enough spiritual power to summon the space-time beast. But based on Lin Yu's current skills, he only needs to wait for about a quarter of an hour before the space-time beast can be summoned by him. As long as he summons the space-time beast and wants to destroy the sky-breaking snake, then it was a breeze. At this moment, Lin Yu finally summoned the space-time beast directly at this critical moment. When Skybreaker saw the space-time beast, there was clearly some fear in his eyes. At this time, he did not dare to attack the space-time beast rashly. At this time, Lin Yu's lips curled up into a sneer, his eyes flashed with a hint of coldness, and the murderous intent in his body was unreservedly displayed. Your offensive just now was pretty good. Today I want you to try the attack of this space-time beast. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, after Susan and Eliza saw this scene, their eyes were full of excitement. At this time, the two of them looked at each other like this, and then just like this smile sweetly. At this time, the broken sky snake saw the space-time beast and obviously wanted to retreat. However, Lin Yu at this moment naturally could not easily call the broken sky snake and escape under his nose. Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at the space-time beast. The space-time beast instantly understood what Lin Yu meant. At this time, he opened his bloody mouth and bit the broken sky snake fiercely. The broken sky snake desperately crawled backwards and retreated. But at this time, there was still no way to avoid the claws of the space-time beast. At this time, the broken sky snake was directly clawed to the ground by the space-time beast. The broken sky snake struggled desperately, but the space-time beast opened its bloody mouth and bit the broken sky snake in one bite. After the space-time beast dealt with the broken sky snake, Lin Yu directly summoned the space-time beast back. The little spiritual power that he had just accumulated with great difficulty disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Lin Yu was in tears, and his eyes were full of helplessness. Alas, what should I do now? It takes too much spiritual energy to summon these big guys. It's a headache. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chang. Chapter 397. At this time, Eliza and Susan ran towards Lin Yu. The two of them came directly in front of Lin Yu, staring directly at Lin Yu. And then he smiled so sweetly. I knew it was right to rely on you at critical moments. As Susan said this, she directly returned Lin Yu's arm, as if she was deliberately provoking Eliza, and of course it also meant to declare sovereignty. At this time, the corner of Eliza's mouth was just a bit of a sneer, and her eyes were full of ridicule and disdain. Lin Yu was also so embarrassed at this time and coughed. Ahem, the spiritual power here is really too thin. Every time we summon the strange beasts in our bodies, we need extremely powerful spiritual power. In this desert, we don't know how many dangers are lurking, so now we have to find a way to store enough spiritual energy to deal with danger in this desert, and then leave. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Elisa and Susan also nodded slightly. It's really good to say it, but... Susan paused when she said this. After hearing what Susan said, Lin Yu turned his head and glanced at Susan, and then smiled like this. Just what? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed directly on Susan. It's just that I'm afraid that if I encounter a storm or other natural disasters in the desert, although these strange beasts hidden underground are scary, they are not as scary as these. Natural and man-made disasters are terrible. As Susan spoke, her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and the bitter smile at the corner of her mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, when Lin Yu heard Susan's words, her face was slightly condensed, and there was a bit of solemnity in her eyes. What you said is true, but there are some things that are hard to say. After Susan and Eliza heard what Lin Yu said, they looked at each other. They were completely confused about what Lin Yu meant by what he said. What exactly do you mean by this? At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. In addition to natural disasters, there are also the disasters of these strange beasts. I always feel that there seems to be a restless force in the depths of the desert, staring at us. I don't know what they want to do, but if you're not careful, I might. Lin Yu paused when he said this, because at this moment, he saw a violent storm sweeping from the center of the desert. At this time, he hugged him without saying a word. He grabbed the two girls, and then immediately rushed to the side. At this time, Lin Yu hugged the two girls tightly. In just a brief moment, the storm rushed towards Lin Yu like this. This storm looked like it wanted to destroy them. Lin Yu felt like he was completely torn into pieces, leaving no room at all. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were filled with a solemn meaning. In this strong wind, Eliza and Susan were like octopuses. hugged Lin Yu tightly. Although he was hugged by these two peerless beauties, Lin Yu had no intention of enjoying it at this moment, because the storm was so fierce. Lin Yu was hiding behind this huge rock, and even he himself didn't know what he was doing. How long can I hide behind this boulder? And just a moment later, the huge boulder was rolled up by the violent storm, and then the boulder shot straight into the sky. At this time, Lin Yu and Susan still had a grain of sand. The three people were swept up by the storm. Amid the violent shaking, Eliza and Susan felt their consciousness gradually become blurred, and then they fell asleep. At this moment, Lin Yu relied on his tenacious consciousness to hold on and prevent himself from fainting. I don't know how much time passed, but at this time, the storm was over. They were thrown to the ground by this heavy force. Lin Yu, who had been holding on until he fainted, fell to the ground. At this time, he fell asleep directly. I don't know how much time passed before Lin Yu woke up. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly found that Susan and Eliza beside him were gone, and he himself was lying on the same bed. Lin Yu's expression suddenly condensed, and a bit of surprise flashed in his eyes. Where am I? At this moment, an old man walked in slowly. The old man's clothes were very shabby and his body was covered with patches. The old man brought a bowl of water. When he saw Lin Yu, his eyes were full of joy. Thank God, you poor little guy finally woke up. After Lin Yu heard what the old man said, a look of confusion flashed in his eyes. May I ask this old man, how long have I been asleep? After the old man heard what Lin Yu said, he also sighed leisurely. A bit of helplessness flashed in his eyes, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. You poor little guy, you have been in a coma for nearly half a month. At first I thought you were dead. But you still have a pulse, so I kept you at home. Lin Yu found it hard to imagine that there were still people in this small place, and it seemed that the old man was just an ordinary person. There was no spiritual power fluctuation on the old man's body. He really couldn't figure out how the old man could protect himself in such a harsh environment. The old man saw Lin Yu staring at him, and suddenly thought, poor little guy, I guess you must be hungry. I will find you something to eat now, but a poor man like me doesn't have anything good, just don't despise it. At this time, Lin Yu smiled, I have to thank you. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I would have died in this desert today. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the old man sighed leisurely, with a bit of helplessness in his eyes and a bitter smile on his face. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 398. Well, actually you should probably be more grateful to the gods. I think your clothes are weird. You must have come from outside. Within 100 miles of here, except for our small town of Altisha, there is no other town. At this time, Lin Yu's face suddenly twisted when he heard what the old man said. He turned his head and glanced at the old man, and then raised his eyebrows slightly. Then I dare to ask the old senior, have you seen the two companions who came with me? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the old man. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the old man raised his head and glanced in his direction. Your two companions. What kind of companions? I have never seen them before. I was looking for sandworms in that desolate desert and met you by chance, but you were the only one around you. As for the other people, not even a shadow was seen. After Lin Yu heard what the old man said, he nodded helplessly, I see, that's it. At this time, Lin Yu also began to feel a hint of worry in his heart. You must know that those little girls have no ability to survive. If they fall into this endless desert, I'm afraid the consequences. When Lin Yu thought of this, he didn't dare to think about it any further. A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were full of helplessness. Oh, these two guys are really annoying, but why did they let go of me in the first place? After waiting for a while, the old man came up with a plate of sandworms. This was a creature similar to earthworms, but different from earthworms. This creature had a milky white color all over its body, and something special. The disgusting creature is very similar, but it has to grow a lot. When Lin Yu saw these sandworms, he suddenly thought of that particularly disgusting creature. Let alone eating them at this time, it was good enough to prevent him from vomiting them out. The old man handed the sandworms to Lin Yu. As an old man, I don't have much ability, so I can only eat these sandworms to satisfy my hunger. I hope you don't mind. At this time, Lin Yu waved his hand and smiled. It doesn't matter, it's just that I'm not very hungry now, so you should eat it. When the old man saw Lin Yu like this, he just thought that Lin Yu might not be used to eating these things. Oh, that's right. Looking at your clothes, I can tell that you must be a rich man from one of the top cities. You must not be used to eating these things. That's it? I will look for valuable things in a while and exchange them for some red sand beast meat for you. At this time, Lin Yu was also moved by the old man's simplicity and kindness. At this time, Lin Yu quickly waved his hand and shook his head. Old senior, there is no need to spend so much, there is no need to spend so much. The old man heard what Lin Yu said. After he finished speaking, he turned to him and smiled. What you said, little kid, you must be hungry after being in a coma for such a long time. If you don't eat something to make up for it, if you try to replenish it, I'm afraid you'll still faint by then. I'm an old guy and I don't have much ability to take you to see a doctor, but it's okay to get you something delicious to replenish it. At this time, Lin Yu didn't know why, but he actually saw a trace of his grandfather in this old man. At this time, Lin Yu also felt a little moved in his heart. He turned his head and he glanced at the old man. Grandpa, take this thing. If there is a pawn shop in the city, pawn this thing. Maybe you can exchange it for something useful. At this time, Lin Yu took out a small white jade porcelain vase from his arms. This small white jade porcelain vase contained the demon core of a lord-level alien beast. For Lin Yu's previous realm, this lord-level the monster core of the alien beast is no different from garbage. The old man didn't have any cultivation, so he couldn't tell there was anything special about the demon core. However, the old man determined that Lin Yu should have come from the upper city area, so everything on him should be of good quality. Just the right thing. At this time, after thinking of this, the old man nodded gently and smiled. Okay, I'll take it over and take a look at it later to see if I can exchange it for something useful. After Lin Yu heard what the old man said, he just nodded slightly and smiled. The old man saw that Lin Yu really had no intention of eating these sandworms, so at this time he just gorged himself on them. The old man ate these sandworms very well. By the afternoon, although Lin Yu had woken up, his body was in severe pain because the spiritual power around him was too thin, so he had no way to communicate with the space-time beast. If he could communicate with the space-time beast, if so, we can use the space-time beast to calculate where Elisa and Susan will land. But now he can't do anything. However, although Lin Yu was somewhat lacking in spiritual power at the moment, he was able to communicate with the earth-splitting bear. The earth-splitting bear can be said to have entered the country very quickly these days, but compared to Lin Yu's other strange beasts, the difference is too far. It seems that there is time to give the leady bear a slight upgrade. Otherwise, this poor big guy will probably be further and further away from them. When Lin Yu thought of this, a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. And at this moment, the old man tremblingly walked into the only pawn shop in the area. In fact, this place was more like a grocery store than a pawn shop. There are all kinds of weapons hanging here, but these weapons look a bit funny. Of course, there are also many imprisoned here, similar to high-level, middle-level, and low-level alien beasts, but the lord-level alien beasts are not even one. The old man was a well-known poor man in the town, so when the old man came in, the pawn shop owner didn't even raise his eyebrows. The pawn shop owner just said in a cold voice, "Today's leftovers have been fed. If you are a fugitive, go somewhere else." Although the old man was a little bitter, he still forced a smile from the corner of his mouth. "No, I'm not here to beg for food, I'm here to swing something." After the pawn shop owner heard what the old man said, he suddenly laughed. His eyes were fixed on the old man, and his eyes were full of mockery. Obviously, he don't believe what the old man said. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 399. I said, "You old guy, you don't have to make fun of me now. What valuable things can you have at home?" "The most valuable thing is probably the clothes you are wearing, but with rags like yours, this is not acceptable." The old man just pretended not to hear the old man's cynicism. After all, he heard such words too many times. At this time, the old man tremblingly took out the small white jade porcelain bottle that Lin Yu gave him. Without the presence of a strange beast, it was certainly impossible for the old man to feel the demonic core of this lord-level beast. This terrifying breath. But for the boss, after the old man took out the small white jade porcelain vase, his eyes were straight. At this time, the boss's eyes were about to glow green, and his eyes were staring straight. He stared at the old man's hand. This is yours. Let me tell you, you'd better not joke with me. How could you, an old guy, possess the demon core of this lord-level beast? Which big shot did you steal it from?" The boss snatched the small white jade porcelain bottle from the old man's hand. His eyes were fixed on the old man, and a strong pressure was pressed directly on the old man. At this time, the old man's face was livid, and he felt that it was difficult to breathe. At this time, the old man quickly waved his hands and shook his head. When the business opened, the boss didn't seem to want the old man to die here, so he removed all the pressure, but at this time, his eyes were still fixed on the old man. "Old guy, I'm still saying the same thing. Hurry up and tell the truth. Which big shot did you steal this thing from? If you explain this matter clearly, we have nothing to do. If you can't explain it, I have to take you to see the official." As soon as the old man heard that he was going to see the official, his whole legs became weak. At this time, he just cried a little bit, and then he fell to his knees in front of the boss. "My lord, I didn't steal this thing. I really didn't steal it. The little kid at home gave it to me. He asked me to exchange it for some food." After the boss heard what the old man said, his eyes were full of disbelief. He simply couldn't believe that the old man was real. "You must know that the strange beasts in this entire town except the city lord are at the lord level. There are very few other people who even have high-level exotic beasts." The boss rolled his eyes, and then he started to think about it. "I accept this thing, but I have a condition." The old man was naturally very happy when he heard that the boss wanted to collect his things. At this time, he nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. "Whatever conditions you have, just ask for them." After the boss heard what the old man said, he suddenly smiled. "I have to meet the owner of this thing. If I meet the owner of this thing, I will keep your thing. When the time comes, I'll give you 50 gold coins." The old man heard it. After the boss said this, he swallowed his saliva. "You must know that these 50 gold coins are enough to last him for 10 years. No problem, I'll take you there right now." The boss tidied up and then closed the door of his pawn shop. At this time, the boss was following behind the old man, but at this time the boss looked arrogant. At this time, Lin Yu was lying on the bed. After resting for a while, he wanted to move, but he was still in great pain. The boss came to the old man's house. When he saw the dilapidated house, a bit of disgust clearly flashed across his face. At this time, he just waved his hand. What does this smell like? Why does it smell so weird and unpleasant? At this time, the boss had just finished speaking when he saw a broken bowl on the table directly opposite the door, with a few scattered sandworms on it. The boss glanced at the old man with a look of disgust on his face. What do you mean? I didn't expect you to actually eat sandworms. Are you disgusting? After the old man heard what the boss said, a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and his face was full of helplessness. I can't help it. Unlike you, who can eat so many delicacies from the mountains and seas, I am an old man. I can just eat some sandworms to satisfy my hunger. The boss's arrogance made Lin Yu feel disgusted. At this time, the boss just looked at Lin Yu coldly. Obviously, he didn't think that the waste lying on the bed could have such a lord-level status. Demon Core. At this time, the boss glanced at the old man coldly, with a bit of fierceness flashing in his eyes. You old guy, are you kidding me? Who is the person who gave you the demon core? Or did you get it from someone else, stolen? After the boss finished speaking, he directly grabbed the old man's collar. At this time, the old man quickly pointed at Lin Yu. I didn't steal it. I really didn't steal it. This kid gave it to me. He gave it to me. The boss walked to Lin Yu's side and saw Lin Yu lying on the bed. His breath was very weak and his face turned pale. At this time, the boss suddenly smiled like this. You told me that this waste gave you this demon core? What are you kidding, old man? You must have stolen it. Now give me this thing, and I cannot report this matter to the government. If I report this matter to the government, I am afraid that you, old man, will not be able to pay with 10 lives. The old man heard that his 50 gold coins were gone, and he felt bitter. He was not for the 50 gold coins, but simply felt that Lin Yu needed to eat something to replenish his body. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the boss said, his blood was surging. He glanced at the boss coldly, his eyes full of murderous intent. At this time, the boss felt as if he was stared at by a ferocious wolf. The boss's face turned pale and ugly in an instant, but then the boss realized one thing, that is, Lin Yu couldn't even move at this time, so he began to be bold again. The boss came in front of Lin Yu and stared at him viciously. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 400. I said, you bastard, you still dare to look at me like this. I think you are so timid because of your ambition. How could I let you look at me like this? After the boss finished speaking, he raised his arm like this. At this moment, Lin Yu's mind moved. A mini version of the earth-shattering bear suddenly appeared behind the boss. The earth-shattering bear, all of a sudden he grabbed the boss's arm. The boss instantly felt as if his arm was tightly clamped by an iron pliers. A bit of coldness flashed in his eyes. I said, you are an old man, but you are still here. If you dare to stop me, I think you are really looking for death. After the boss finished speaking, he turned around and glanced behind him. When the boss saw the ground-breaking bear standing behind him, the boss's legs became a little weak. At this time, Li Daxing just glanced at Lin Yu, as if asking Lin Yu what to do. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled, teach him a lesson and let him get money for the old man. The boss never expected that this useless man lying on the bed would actually have such a terrifying alien beast on his body. Just by looking at the aura, he knew that this alien beast was stronger than all the alien beasts in his shop. At this time, the boss was also pounding in his heart, and he had no idea how to ease the next situation. The boss opened his mouth and was about to speak, but before he could say anything, a scream followed. It turned out that the boss's wrist was directly drilled into powder by the earth-shattering bear with a little force. At this time, Earth-splitting bear looked at Lin Yu with an apologetic expression. In fact, Lin Yu at first just planned to let Earth-splitting bear teach the boss a lesson. but who knew that this Earth Splitter bear hadn't come out for a long time, and this time no one had control of its strength, and thus, this kind of tragedy happened. Forget it, this is the same guy, he deserves it, let him go. After Lin Yu finished speaking, Earth-splitting bear let go of the boss. At this time, the boss was also relieved, as if he had escaped from death. As soon as Lin Yu thought about it, he took back the earth-splitting bear. At this time, he just glanced at the boss coldly, with a bit of coldness flashing in his eyes. How is it? Now you believe that the demon core is mine. How dare the boss say no at this time? He nodded like a chicken pecking at rice, and there was a look of complete respect in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Lin Yu nodded, how much this demon core is worth, you can give my grandfather as much as you want. Otherwise, if it's a little less, I will crush a bone in your body. How many bones in your body can I crush? Do the math for yourself. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, and a layer of cold sweat broke out on the boss's forehead. At this time, he hurriedly smiled at Lin Yu. Don't worry, please keep your heart in mind this time. I will never dare to mistreat your grandfather at all. I will give him all the gold coins in my shop now. What do you think? At this time, Lin Yu did not speak. The boss thought it was Lin Yu and was a little unhappy, so he gritted his teeth at this time. He looked at the houses around him that seemed a bit dilapidated. So at this time, the boss seemed to have made this great determination, I still have a house. I have never moved into that house. If you don't mind it, I will give this house to you, this is the highest price I can offer. If you ask for more, I will have to return this treasure to you. At this time, the old man heard from the side. After the boss said this, he was shocked and stunned. He never expected that the thing Lin Yu took out was so valuable. At this time, the old man turned his head and glanced at Lin Yu, baby, is this thing particularly important to you? If it is, let's not take him for granted. Grandpa wants to think of a way to get you some meat to replenish your body. Lin Yu heard this. After the two of them said this, they were on the verge of crying for a while. In fact, this thing was no different from garbage to him. Before, he had used the Lord-level demon core to get rid of it. Except apart from this function, he really didn't find any function of this Lord-level demon core. Lin Yu just smiled, no, just pawn it. This thing is not of much use to me. Grandpa, please clean it up and go with him to get the gold coins later. I am really like this now, I can't help you. The old man just smiled, you little kid, your top priority now is to rest and take good care of yourself. Lin Yu just smiled, then turned around and glanced at the pawn shop owner. The owner of the pawn shop instantly understood what Lin Yu meant, and then ran out at a trot. Old man, please hurry back with me to get the gold coins. By the way, I also know the most famous chef here. I will ask him to prepare a table of good wine and food for you in a while. That person just smiled with a greedy look on his face. Lin Yu just thought this guy was a bit annoying, so he just closed his eyes and rested. After they walked out, the boss smiled at the old man with a greedy face, I didn't expect that you would meet such a noble person in the end after being unlucky all your life. If you become rich in the future, please remember to help me. After hearing what the boss said, the old man just smiled, I am an old man, how can I talk about getting rich? After a busy afternoon, the boss took Lin Yu to his new residence respectfully as if he were Lin Yu's grandson. Lin Yu's recovery speed was abnormal. He was able to move in just one afternoon. There was a sumptuous dinner in the evening. When the old man saw the sumptuous dishes in front of him, he felt dazed for a while, and his eyes were full of disbelief. Alas, I didn't expect that I could eat such good food in my life. If I look for it for a few more decades, maybe my poor son wouldn't be. The old man stopped talking about this.